I get the sense that it's still quite evolving, that people don't really, there isn't, and maybe there will never be and should never be, a consensus about what a creative writing PhD looks like. I think it is not really valued by publishing as an index of whether you're going to be able to write a good book or not. Although I notice increasingly that lots of debut novelists have got PhDs, and I think that's, so I think there's the recognition that you can set time aside to do a really good novel, but I don't think any agent or publisher would take more notice because you have an academic qualification. I guess there's an anxiety about how long a PhD might take versus the pressure to publish, or the kind of material that you might produce, and will it then be suitable to be in an actual book, which hasn't really applied to me, but I imagine that's something that people worry about.
The AHRC, HEFGE and other bodies have begun to recognise creative writing as a form of research, a form of new knowledge successfully shared, and therefore they want you to think in terms of a research question to which a piece of creative writing can be an answer. But it's not an answer of the usual academic kind, perhaps, not like historical study or even literary criticism.
It's hard to say in terms of what worth could mean in terms of publishing, because the PhD has made me write a better book, so there is that sense of worth in that sense, because I had the freedom of an entire year where I could just read. You don't get that commercially, so to be able to do that was a luxury. But having someone on their books, either as an agent or an editor, who has a PhD is worthless. It means nothing.
Writing a book teaches you how to write that book, but it doesn't necessarily teach you how to write the next one. But what it does is it gives you certain tools for your toolbox that you might think that would be useful again. And I think in creative writing that's what we're doing. We're giving other writers as many different tools for their toolbox as we possibly can, and they can select what they want to do with that. You know, it's giving them an idea that they'll need some kind of structure. You know, before you build anything, you need to know whether it's going to be a shed or a cathedral, or you know what it is that you're setting out to do.
Creative practice is extremely important, and I think because there's a lot more interdisciplinary work going on, that a creative practice can be a huge part of those that interdisciplinary practice. I mean, I know that from time to time I've been asked as a digital writer to be involved in things. So some didn't get the funding, but some did. This is before I started my PhD, because of my practice, and it worked. There are so many applications, really.
I think as creative practitioners we see the world a little bit differently, and so we can make these types of syntheses that perhaps sort of pure researchers wouldn't necessarily.
But it's also useful, I think, for the writer discussing their own work and other work in the public sphere, which writers increasingly are expected to do. Giving interviews on radio or television, writing reviews, that sort of thing which is vital to keeping your own work in people's minds, keeping it current, promoting it. The skills feed into that as well. Well, the obvious one is that you can go on to teach creative writing in a university. The PhD isn't an essential requirement for that, but increasingly it's expected, and I guess that as with other academic posts, eventually it will be a requirement.
We're still at a relatively early stage of creative writing being an academic subject. And there's sometimes a feeling that there's a lack of consensus among different institutions, for instance, as to what a PhD should be in creative writing. And how, for instance, the critical part of it relates to the creative part, and what is being assessed and what and what is being trained, I think it's important that there develops a wider sort of consensus on what those things are. And I think students themselves will feel more comfortable in that setting, and it will actually enable them, it will liberate them to be more creative within that framework, because you need to understand those boundaries before you can actually sort of let yourself go in a way.